Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 301 to 310. If Russell were in front of Bernadette at this moment, a scene of father-daughter, turning against each other, would likely play out immediately. This couldn't even be blamed on Bernadette, considering how Russell acted. Any normal person in this situation would want to punch him twice and shout from the bottom of their heart, "I've worked so hard for so many years, and this is what I get." So, serious people should never write diaries. Even if they do, they should never write down their dark histories. Otherwise, they will end up like Russell. But then again, who would seriously write a diary? I certainly don't consider myself a serious person. Lynn muttered to himself. As someone who also wrote the Lynn diary, he was very clear about his own nature. Do you want to keep listening, Bernadette? Lynn asked as he looked at the clearly about to explode Bernadette, pausing his diary reading considerately. Sorry, Your Highness, I lost my composure again. Bernadette took a deep breath, inhaling several times to suppress the emotion surging in her heart. She forced a smile and said, "Please continue reading my father's diary. Don't worry about my feelings." As she spoke, a fierce fire seemed to ignite in Bernadette's eyes. Despite her efforts to suppress it, her anger was still far from being fully contained. As long as you're aware. Lynn was happy to continue. He picked up another Russell diary and continued, April 9th, I just returned from Countess Warinka's masquerade party when I suddenly felt an emptiness in my heart. This diary entry wasn't too short, but it wasn't too long either. It mainly described Russell's feeling of emptiness after sleeping with one woman after another, reflecting on his life and proclaiming, Russell, you can't continue being this degenerate. Although Lynn reasonably suspected he was just physically exhausted and temporarily in a post-nut clarity state. Hearing this diary entry, Bernadette's expression improved slightly but not much. After all, she had learned from experience. Moreover, Bernadette was well aware of her father's libertine nature and didn't think he would truly restrain himself. When she had her rose-colored glasses on, she might have had fantasies, but now those glasses were almost completely shattered, and she naturally didn't hold unrealistic expectations for her father. Indeed, almost immediately following this diary entry, Russell's voice could be heard, and he continued his libertine ways. Crash. The chair Bernadette was sitting on suddenly shattered into a pile of wood, yet she remained in a sitting position, her expression devoid of any warmth. Although she no longer held much hope for her father, the stark reality still made Bernadette very angry. Lynn glanced at the non-existent chair Bernadette was sitting on and did not prompt her to clean up. He continued reading the diary, April 14th, I've been attending too many events recently, and the flesh is weak even though the spirit is willing. This diary entry was quite satisfying in a way. Russell had finally overextended himself and sought a pharmacist to concoct a potion to restore his vitality and enhance certain abilities. Upon hearing this entry, Bernadette almost instinctively let out a cold laugh and murmured softly, serves you right. Great Emperor, if you get beaten up by your daughter when you meet her, you can't blame me. Lynn glanced at Bernadette, muttering to himself. Perhaps out of a final sense of conscience or concern that overstimulation would ruin future amusement, Lynn chose a more serious diary entry next. February 12th, I made a mystical item very suitable for Bernadette. This was another diary entry related to her. It mainly recorded Russell making a magical item to help her block the nagging of a hidden sage. Besides Russell's pride in his craftsmanship, it was filled with praises for his daughter. His doting father attributes seemed to overflow. She couldn't help but purse her lips. The anger she felt seemed to be hit with a dampening stick, unable to continue but also not dissipating immediately. Bernadette's feelings towards her father were complex, filled with both deep love and resentment. The following diary entries mostly related to serious matters. Lynn read them slowly and carefully before neatly putting them away. He then looked at the complex and subtle expressions on Bernadette's face and gently asked, if you have any words you want me to convey to him, you can write a letter, and I will deliver it to him. Bernadette almost immediately looked up at Lynn, her expression a mix of surprise, astonishment, and a hint of joy. She stood up, trying to remain calm but slightly flustered, and said, please wait a moment. I'll get paper and pen. I do have many things I want to tell my father. She wanted to know how her father had been all these years, about his current situation, and wanted to tell him about her own circumstances. Bernadette had so much to say to Russell. She hadn't seen her father for over 150 years. In a secret study on the Dawn, there was a mountain of letters, each written by Bernadette during her search for her father. Some letters, written years ago, were filled with her complaints and grievances towards her father. Others, written more recently, overflowed with irreplaceable longing. Now that she knew she could actually write to Russell, Bernadette immediately found pen and paper. But then she felt lost. Despite having so much to say, despite having written countless letters over the years, when it came time to write, she found herself unable to put down a single word. Lynn was not surprised. He sipped his coffee slowly, showing no intention of rushing Bernadette, and waited patiently for the Queen Mystic to begin writing. Bernadette did not keep Lynn waiting long. After about 2 or 3 minutes, she seemed to make a decision. The tip of her pen finally touched the paper. Dear Father, I hope this letter finds you well. Lynn watched her write quietly, not paying much attention to the content of the letter but having a general idea of what Bernadette was writing. After finishing the letter, Bernadette carefully folded the paper and placed it in an envelope. She then handed the letter to Lynn with great seriousness and said, "Thank you for waiting. Please deliver this letter to my father. Thank you very much. It's no trouble. I will deliver it to him exactly as it is. Is there anything else you need me to convey to your father?" Lynn asked, taking the letter and placing it in his space pocket along with Russell's diaries. Bernadette hesitated, biting her lip before finally making up her mind and speaking, "Your Highness, there is indeed one more thing I would like you to tell my father. Welp. My country just heated up some oil in a wok and jumped into it." End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. What do you want me to say? Lynn looked at her gently and asked. Please tell my father that, if I can meet him in the real world next time. Bernadette paused before continuing, I hope he can read to me those diaries he wrote once. Wow. Doesn't that mean Russell will embarrass himself personally? No, it's already like reading one's embarrassing teenage writings out loud. Lynn couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, feeling a surge of mischievous glee. So he smiled and asked, is there something wrong with the way I read the diaries? His tone was gentle and puzzled, which made Bernadette suddenly at a loss for words. She hastily explained, I don't think you read the diaries poorly, it's just for some personal reasons, I hope my father can explain some things to me himself. Don't be too nervous, I'm not angry. I can understand why you want Russell to read the diaries to you personally. Lynn then seemed to think of something, and his smile grew brighter. Although you can't meet in the real world for now, perhaps I can arrange for you to meet briefly in a dream. Yes, Lynn suddenly thought of something. The reason he didn't allow this father-daughter pair to meet in reality was mainly because the place where Russell resided was too dangerous, and Russell himself was not stable enough. But if they met briefly in a dream he created, it would be completely fine. Though Lynn was not as specialized in dreams as the Evernight goddess and didn't often use such skills, he was quite proficient in this area. Otherwise, how could he have manipulated the dreams of a certain nightmare dragon using his true self's power the first time? Usually, Lynn didn't have many opportunities to use his dream skills. He more often relied on the abilities of the knowledge or time. So Lynn really had the ability to construct a dream for Russell and Bernadette to meet. This didn't even require the power of his main body, just the skills he had gleaned from the Evernight goddess. As for why Lynn would go to such lengths, partly it was because he felt it was his duty as someone who adheres to a chaotic lawful alignment to help this touching father-daughter reunion. And partly, Lynn just wanted to watch the drama unfold. After all, anyone could see that the anger Bernadette held towards Russell due to his diaries hadn't truly subsided. It was merely overshadowed by other, more positive emotions for the time being. So if Bernadette really met Russell under these circumstances, well. Lynn, Tisk, Ed inwardly, feeling a moment of sympathy for the Emperor, before looking at Bernadette with growing interest and asking, in the dream I construct, there won't be any danger. If you agree, I can arrange for you to meet tonight. As for Russell's opinion, that wasn't important. Lynn issued a super smug smile.jpg. Besides, Lynn believed that as a doting father, Russell would be very, very willing to see Bernadette and see how his little princess was doing. Of course, this didn't mean that the letter written earlier was meaningless. On one hand, Russell could use the letter to reminisce. On the other hand, given Russell and Bernadette's situation, some things are best expressed in a letter, rather than face to face. It's like how sometimes people who can meet still write letters to each other, letters have their own significance. Meeting. Bernadette was stunned, clearly not expecting to jump from writing a letter to meeting so quickly. Although it was only a dream and not in the real world, for Bernadette, as long as she could see her father, the form of the meeting didn't matter much. So, after her initial surprise, Bernadette quickly said, "I agree. Ahem. I very much agree to meet my father in a dream tonight. Is there anything I need to prepare in advance? Probably just go to bed early. If you stay up all night, you won't be able to enter the dream." Lynn said with a smile, making Bernadette pause, unsure whether to laugh or not. Lynn thought for a moment, then raised his hand. A coin-sized bubble appeared in his palm, which he handed to Bernadette. She quickly took the colorful, crystal-like bubble, still figuring out its purpose, when Lynn said, "Tonight, place this bubble by your side when you sleep. I will guide you into the dream through it, so you can reunite with your father in the dream." "Okay, I understand." Bernadette held the bubble tightly but carefully, afraid of crushing the fragile-looking thing. "Don't worry, it's not that fragile. It's indestructible until its energy is exhausted," Lynn said with a smile, seeing her cautious actions. The bubble Lynn gave to Bernadette was a small manifestation of spirituality, similar to what he had used on Bethel, but much smaller in quantity. It served as a trigger to help Lynn pull her into the constructed dream. But why is it always a bubble? The previous information packet was also a bubble. I didn't intentionally make it bubble-shaped. Is it because my essence is a bubble? Lynn muttered inwardly but didn't dwell on the issue. After all, Lynn knew what he was. He still had the image of his true self stored in his mind. Any entity attempting to invade his mental world without his permission would first face the dazzling Mr. Bubbles image. Even Adam, a spectator pathway kings of Angel, could only access some shallow thoughts by using certain keywords. This was part of Lynn's disguise, making himself appear more human. But if anyone tried to delve deeper, they would face the true self's image. If someone succeeded in bypassing this, they would face the hellish difficulty of the second level, the small bubble connected to Lynn's true self's mental world. The outcomes would be twofold. Either they would trigger Lynn, resulting in a direct confrontation, watching a certain small part of Mr. Bubbles descend upon this mental world and as a result get deleted, or they would be granted vast and boundless knowledge by the generous Mr. Bubbles, leading to their soul, personality, and self-awareness being forever immersed or destroyed by this information. Thus, Lynn was never afraid of mental attacks. He even slightly welcomed them. "I understand." Bernadette nodded, carefully storing the bubble. Lynn then smiled and said, "Our meeting today is over. Now I will go meet your father to deliver your letter and inform him about tonight's meeting. I'm sure he will eagerly anticipate it." End of chapter. For Lynn, this meeting with Bernadette was undoubtedly successful. He not only caused trouble for the Augustus family but also fulfilled his long-held desire to read Russell's diary to Bernadette. However, on the road of amusement, Mr. Bubbles never gets satisfied. So, after bidding farewell to Bernadette, Lynn promptly controlled his divine avatar to give Russell a call. Pair of aces. Pair of twos. Bomb. When the call connected, Lynn reformed a temporary avatar in Russell's mausoleum. What he saw was Russell playing cards with his shadow. They were playing a game called Landlord, which Russell was losing. Russell was the landlord, and his shadow split into three, playing the roles of three peasants. The cards they used weren't typical paper cards but energy-formed temporary items. From Lynn's extensive card-playing experience, it was evident that Russell, as the landlord, was about to lose. Although I know some people play cards with themselves out of boredom, losing to yourself is something else. Are your card skills really that bad? Lynn laughed, his tone slightly teasing. Don't talk nonsense. My card skills are great, just bad luck this round. Watch me crush them in the next round. Russell couldn't tolerate anyone questioning his card skills and immediately retorted. But he couldn't help cursing as he continued, Lynn, could you bring me something else next time, like novels or some food and drink? When I was insane, it wasn't so bad, but now that I'm sober, it's pure torture. Although Russell had stayed in the mausoleum for over 150 years, most of that time, his corrupted personality was in control, while his main personality was suppressed and asleep. Therefore, he hadn't felt much loneliness or boredom until he became sober. But after the corrupted personality went offline and the main personality regained control, Russell, alone in the mausoleum, genuinely felt bored to death. Russell was never the type to sit still. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so reckless. If he had something to do now, it would be fine, it could distract him. But unfortunately, the unlucky thing was, there was really nothing to do in the mausoleum. As everyone knows, loneliness and boredom can sometimes break a person. While Russell wouldn't be broken by loneliness and boredom, he was undoubtedly feeling restless. Hearing Russell's words, Lynn instinctively thought of Bethel, who was probably reading novels and eating pastries in the alternate space he had set up. He couldn't help but feel a bit guilty and averted his eyes. However, the next moment, Lynn regained his composure. After all, his relationship with Bethel was different from his relationship with Russell. It was natural that he wouldn't be as thoughtful with the latter as he was with the former when they first met. Mainly, Russell hadn't made any requests. Otherwise, how could Lynn not bring him things? He wasn't a stingy person. That's right, it was all Russell's fault. Firmly pushing the blame onto Russell in his heart, Lynn then smiled and said, I don't mind bringing you these things, but you'll need to make a list in advance. Also, call me the Angel of Secrets. I'm more used to that name. But didn't you say you two are the same person? Russell glanced at Lynn and exclaimed, actually, I'm quite curious what the other you is like. Since your divine self is so, fun-loving, what kind of mischief must your human self get up to? Russell thought about it, feeling it was unimaginable what kind of person that would be. However, that didn't stop him from saying, as for the list, I can make it right away, but there's no paper or pen here unless you brought those things. My human self, in a certain sense, is much more harmless than I am. Lynn laughed softly as if recalling something, then took out paper and a pen from his spatial pocket, along with a letter from Bernadette. Russell's gaze froze upon the letter. As a good father and a doting one, he was well aware of the type of envelope Bernadette usually used. Though the specific pattern might differ, the style was unmistakable. Most importantly, the envelope bore the words, to father. Some might not recognize their child's handwriting, but Russell certainly did. You met her? Russell asked, his voice dry. Even at the moment of his fall, he hadn't truly felt fear, but now he was suddenly filled with a bit of fear. The fear was about the letter, or rather, the message from his daughter. How would Bernadette view him? Did she still hate him? Or would she choose to forgive him? Russell's rationality told him Bernadette was a smart and understanding child. Knowing he was corrupted, she would understand the mistakes he made and no longer hate him as she did before. But Russell's emotions made him shrink back, making him fear seeing words of hatred from his daughter on that letter. Russell had been hated and cursed by countless people, but he didn't care about the attitudes of these gods, angels, or high-sequence individuals. He didn't care about the betrayal of the nobles and officials who once served him, nor did he care about the hatred of the commoners who lived in his kingdom. Russell cared about very few people, and even fewer could hurt him. Bernadette was one of those few and the most important one. Yes, I met her at your memorial exhibition held by the Church of Steam and Machinery. Lynn nodded, not intending to hide this matter. He continued slowly, she seemed to miss you a lot, so I went over and told her you were still alive and that you had a message for her. My memorial exhibition held by the Church of Steam and Machinery. Russell was momentarily stunned, his expression complex and subtle. Then, hearing the rest of Lynn's words, he couldn't help but open his eyes wide, saying, you just walked up and told her directly. No build-up or anything. Why would there be build-up? This isn't bad news, is it? Lynn glanced at Russell and smiled. If you're worried that she'll still hate you for what you did in your later years, I can tell you I've already informed her about you being corrupted. Of course, I didn't reveal anything about the outer god, Just told her you were corrupted by an evil god. This won't harm her. You told her. Russell opened his mouth but said nothing in the end. He scratched his head irritably, then cautiously asked, did she forgive me? I don't know, but she probably did. At least, she should forgive you for what you did in your later years. Lynn's smile grew gentler, like someone offering comfort to a dying person. As for before that, end of chapter, however, the soon-to-be socially deceased emperor was still oblivious. He just let out a long sigh, as if he had put down a heavy burden, and said, that's good, that's good. Although the emperor was slow-witted and his acting skills were poor, unlike his drama-loving and somewhat mischievous transmigrator, Russell's memory hadn't degraded to that of a goldfish. So, he soon recalled what Lynn said and looked at him with a stiff expression. You didn't really read the diary to Bernadette, did you? From his expression, it was clear that Russell wanted a negative answer at this moment. However, how could not Lynn fulfill his wish? The chosen fun maker Lynn just showed a brilliant smile and said, I'm a person who keeps my promises, so of course, I read your diary to Bernadette. No need to thank me, it's what I should do. Russell. Who would thank you for something like this? Russell stared hard at Lynn and couldn't help but bite his lip. In some ways, this father and daughter were very similar, even having the same small habits. Russell, holding on to the last shred of hope, asked, since you keep your promises, you didn't read any particularly stimulating diary entries to Bernadette, did you? I did not read her any overly stimulating diary entries, like, the taste of a demoness still isn't bad. I didn't read that one at all, Lynn said with a smile. Russell immediately let out a sigh of relief but didn't completely relax. He then cautiously asked, so what diary entries did you read to her? Speaking of this topic, Lynn was no longer sleepy. He smiled and took out the diaries he had shown to Bernadette from his space pocket. These diaries were all genuine diary entry, without any forgeries, collected by Lynn at various Beyonder gatherings. Lynn then coughed lightly, as if he were reading the diaries to Bernadette again, and began to read them to Russell. March 6th, damn it, I'm almost constipated from eating the food here. Russell's eyes widened almost immediately. He almost lunged forward, one hand covering Lynn's mouth, and the other grabbing the diary from his hand. Lynn didn't stop him. Although he thought it would be very interesting to read those diaries again in front of Russell, Lynn was a person with boundaries. He knew that if he really did that, Russell might seek mutual destruction with the mother goddess of depravity on the spot. Xness. So, as a considerate fellow transmigrator, Lynn decided to give Russell a little breathing room and not do something so cruel. After all, reading the diaries to Russell here was less fun compared to the dream where Russell would read the diaries to Bernadette in her dreams. As for Russell, what if he lied and made things up? No worries, the great and just angel of secrets would take up the responsibility of supervision and would not let Bernadette be deceived by Russell's fabricated diaries. Yes, Lynn was that much of a rascal. While Lynn was daydreaming about tonight's fun, Russell had already browsed through all the diaries at a speed of 10 lines at a glance. His hands were trembling, his pupils dilated, and he looked as if he was about to die. In a sense, Russell indeed had achieved a kind of social death. Why the hell? Russell couldn't help but curse. At this moment, he almost wanted to strangle Lynn and die together with him. Didn't you promise me that you wouldn't read overly stimulating diary entries to Bernadette? These diaries don't seem stimulating enough for you. Lynn first broke free from Russell's hand, then slowly smiled and said, compared to, the taste of a demoness still isn't bad. And, XX with mother and daughter XX. Lynn read out a long string of highly inappropriate diary entries without a change in expression, looking at Russell without any guilt and even with a clear conscience. Don't you think the diary entries I chose are already mild enough? After all, it's your fault for writing so many scandalous things in your diaries. When I was selecting the diaries, 8 out of 10 entries were about those things. What do you expect me to do? In the end, Lynn's expression even looked a bit innocent, with a touch of genuine grievance. Russell, how do you even have the face to look aggrieved? Russell was breathing heavily. If it wasn't for the fact that his body no longer needed to breathe and breathing was just a habitual action, he might have suffocated himself. But what could Russell do? He couldn't really do anything to Lynn because of this. In the end, he could only squeeze out through gritted teeth. I hope you didn't go overboard. Of course, Russell's attitude was also because Lynn was right about one thing. Compared to those unreadable diary entries, the ones Lynn chose were indeed already mild. From this perspective, Lynn wasn't completely inconsiderate. Just considerate, but not much. Damn it. If I trust you again, I'm stupid. Russell couldn't help but curse, using every swear word he knew. Although he didn't say any names, everyone knew who he was cursing. Lynn just watched him quietly, seeing Russell's voice grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Then he smiled and said, I recorded Bernadette's reactions when I read those diary entries to her. Do you want to see? Russell was stunned. He opened his mouth but couldn't say no. Instead, he nodded heavily. Then Russell saw a 360-degree high-definition holographic projection. Russell was stunned, unable to resist asking, only 100 years have passed, and the technology outside has advanced this much. Even holographic technology became available. Wasn't it more advanced than before he transmigrated? This isn't technology, but a little skill I invented. However, Lynn seemed to be inspired by something, pinching his chin and saying, You're right, perhaps I should think about making this skill more accessible. If he was to support the Church of Steam and Machinery, he should also help advance this world's technology tree. Besides traditional technology, advancing some supernatural technology in this world was normal, right? As far as Lynn knew, the Church of Steam and Machinery had combined technology with the supernatural, but it couldn't be popularized, reserved for high-ranking members as exquisite toys. But when Lynn helped this world advance its technology tree, he wouldn't limit it like the god of steam and machinery. His ambition was to push this world's technology to the level of Earth's civilization, or even higher. If you popularize this, it would be a good thing. Maybe. Russell, seemingly thinking of something, showed a smile that all men understood. But then he couldn't laugh because the holographic projection had begun to play the main content. After the entire process of reading the diaries was played, Russell, like a deeply wounded small animal, covered his face with his hands, his voice trembling. Bernadette must really want to kill me now. End of chapter. If I am to be judged for the crimes I have committed, it should be done by a court, not by Lynn reading my diary to Bernadette. The last words of Emperor Russell 1.0. Alright, the above quote was just a joke, but at this moment, Russell indeed had the urge to simply die and be done with it. Should he just go find the mother goddess of depravity and perish together? Russell began to seriously consider the feasibility of this idea. If he was going to die sooner or later, he wanted to die with dignity. Just as Russell was internally screaming and feeling utterly defeated in front of his daughter, dreading her bone-breaking hand technique, he heard Lynn from across the room say, No matter if Bernadette actually kills you or not, I suggest you prepare in advance. Tonight, I will arrange for you to meet her in a dream. As your boss, I hope you can have a pleasant father-daughter meeting. Lynn's attitude seemed sincere, as if he wasn't the one who had orchestrated everything to this point. Russell, however, was too shocked to complain about Lynn's crocodile tears. He looked up at Lynn, stunned, and stammered, meet. Tonight. Don't you want to? Lynn smiled at him, as if he would abandon the meeting if Russell said no. Of course, I want to. Russell's voice started loud but then deflated, looking conflicted. I just wasn't ready. It's too sudden. And Russell's expression turned grim as he glared at Lynn. You did this on purpose, didn't you? If he had known they could meet, he would never have allowed Lynn to read the diary to Bernadette. This guy definitely wanted to see him embarrassed and even hoped for a father-daughter fallout. Russell couldn't help but accuse, Lynn, you're so malicious. Thank you, Angel of Secrets. I'm so grateful you let me meet my precious daughter, Lynn said jokingly while making a voice like Russell and maintained his gentle smile, even straightening his clothes leisurely before saying, Russell, we're all adults. When adults make mistakes, they must learn to bear the consequences. If you had been a bit more restrained in your youth or hadn't written your diary so enthusiastically, you wouldn't be in this situation today. Fuck you. Hearing Lynn's deflection, Russell had 1,000 curses in his heart but, considering he needed Lynn's help to meet Bernadette, he restrained himself and only swore in his mind. Russell then squatted on the ground, holding his head with a pained expression. Though he made no sound, it was clear he was internally screaming like a distressed groundhog. In short, he was thinking, why? Why did things turn out this way? He had finally shaken off corruption, regained his sanity, and was about to meet his beloved daughter. It should have been double the happiness, so why did it turn out like this? Bad writers should be taken out and beaten. Lynn suddenly remarked. Russell glared at him and said, sometimes I really think you're on the spectator pathway and using telepathy on me. To read your mind, I don't think I need Beyonder abilities. After all, everything you feel is written on your face. Lynn thoughtfully rubbed his chin, looking serious. Fuck you. Russell cursed inwardly again. After cursing for a while, his expression gradually calmed, and he stood up. Finally calmed down. Lynn glanced at him, smiling, already planning his final move. What else can I do? Things have come to this point. I can't really die over it. Besides, Russell's tone turned low as he continued, in this matter, I truly have no excuse. I wronged her mother, my wife. Though Russell was quite a playboy, he was self-aware enough to know he was a scumbag in some respects. He felt some guilt but not much. After all, until Bernadette was born, Russell never truly saw himself as part of this world. He lived like a player, never fully integrating. In this sense, Russell wasn't a good person. He brought significant technological advancements to this world, indirectly helping many people, and he chose to protect this world with his life upon discovering it was his world. Otherwise, he wouldn't have told Klein in the original work to completely kill him if he ever endangered the world. Russell wasn't a perfect character, far from it. He had a questionable personal life and hurt many people in his madness. Yet, he contributed enormously to the world, indirectly aiding countless individuals, and chose to protect this world with his life. Despite his flaws, Russell was at least a good father. So, even knowing the meeting with Bernadette wouldn't be a warm family reunion, Russell chose to face it. Lynn raised an eyebrow, seeming to smile before saying, by the way, Bernadette asked me to tell you something. The holographic message he showed Russell earlier didn't include this part. It only showed Bernadette reading the diary to build up to the climax. Russell. Just as he resolved to admit his mistakes and make amends to his dear daughter, Russell stiffened and nervously swallowed. He turned his head stiffly to look at Lynn, his tone cautious. What did Bernadette ask you to say? End of chapter. Her exact words were. Lynn paused here, looking at Russell's tense expression, before continuing, I hope he can personally read those diaries he wrote to me. Though the original phrase included the premise of meeting in the real world, that was based on Bernadette not knowing she could meet in dreams. In fact, Lynn was certain that tonight, when they meet, Bernadette would definitely want her dear father to read those diaries to her. Russell. Let me die. Corrupted personality. Corrupted personality, come back. Why aren't you coming back yet? Why are you so quiet? Russell exploded. Even though it was also about his daughter knowing the contents of the diary, having someone else read it to her was different from him reading it himself. There was no comparison. Russell knew exactly what kind of nonsense was in his diary. Just watching Lynn read those diaries to Bernadette made Russell almost want to dig a hole with his toes, while also worrying that his daughter might kill him. If he had to read them himself. I don't think I deserve this. Russell said seriously and through gritted teeth as he looked at Lynn. Though he planned to apologize to his daughter and win her over, he never imagined doing it like this. Was this reasonable? I think it's very reasonable. Lynn shrugged and gave an innocent look, and it's not me wanting to persecute you, your daughter asked for it herself. Actually, I was surprised she had this talent. What talent? A talent for persecution. Russell was almost speechless, but Lynn seriously said. Would you mind recording what you just said and showing it to Bernadette? Russell, who was about to curse regardless, suddenly stopped. He trembled as he raised his middle finger towards Lynn and then collapsed straight to the ground, looking as if he had died. If it were someone else, they might panic, but Lynn wasn't fooled. He could tell that Russell was just playing dead to avoid reality. So, Lynn walked over, kicked Russell twice, and smiled. Instead of playing dead to avoid reality, I suggest you think about what to say when you meet your daughter tonight. Russell shot up, holding his kicked back side, and yelled, "You really kicked me." Of course, Lynn said innocently. Lynn, I now suspect everything you said before was a lie. You're not divine, you're human, Russell said with a grief-stricken look. If you had met Amon, you wouldn't think that. That angel of time also doesn't have normal human qualities. But in terms of evil pranks, my current state is still a bit behind him, Lynn said, adding silently in his mind. Of course, if it were me from the fourth epoch, it would be the other way around. It's not that Lynn had a huge difference in personality between the two timelines. The difference in circumstances led to different approaches. The Angel of Secrets, Lynn, indeed didn't mess around as much as the mechanical angel, Lynn, from the fourth epoch. Angel of Time, Amon. Isn't that the one you mentioned before? I've only read about him in texts. You seem to know him well. Russell muttered, then looked at Lynn. Not very well. Let's just say I've beaten, bombed, and persecuted him, Lynn smiled. Russell. Russell immediately thought of the time Lynn told him about making Amon's worms jump wildly. Though he didn't know the details, at that moment, Russell genuinely felt pity for the Angel of Time, Amon. How badly must he have been tormented? Why pity him? He doesn't deserve it. He's just a bad child who fantasizes about power but doesn't want to take responsibility, Lynn said slowly, noticing what Russell was thinking. You should be glad I'm not on his side. If that bad child became the Lord of Mysteries, he wouldn't help this world resist the outer gods. He would abandon everyone and survive alone. In this aspect, even the former Lord of Mysteries was better than Amon. The former, due to drawing too much hatred, was naturally an enemy of many outer gods. They wouldn't let him go even if he wanted to run. Moreover, the former Lord of Mysteries had committed numerous sins, with countless prior offenses, toying with various outer gods. How could they let such a threat go? They're mad, not stupid. Well, except for the Lamp Jinn, who might have been duped by the former Lord of Mysteries. Otherwise, why would he have invested in the next candidate after being deceived by the previous one? Lynn mused, his thoughts flashing. Speaking of the Lamp Jinn, why not find him for research? He's a ready-made sample of an outer god. Though outer gods differ, their corruption must have some commonalities. Lynn, rubbing his chin, finally considered the Lamp Jinn. Russell, unaware of Lynn's thoughts, frowned, saying, then you indeed did a good deed. Upon realizing this world was his home, Russell couldn't view it as just a game anymore. Naturally, he didn't want a future Lord of Mysteries who was irresponsible. But, Russell seemed to think of something and looked at Lynn. Since you exist in the past, present, and future, you should know who the future Lord of Mysteries is, right? I do, Lynn nodded. In the original history, the one who first saw your corrupted state is the future Lord of Mysteries. He's on good terms with another version of me. When the time is right, I'll introduce you, Lynn smiled. One more won't hurt. He didn't mind letting Klein meet another fellow native. Surely, seeing Russell's persecution would make Klein appreciate his mildness more. Everything is relative. Russell noticed the detail. But Lynn didn't explain, just smiling at the clearly evasive Russell, returning to the previous topic. So, Russell, are you ready to read your diaries to your daughter? I'll be supervising to prevent any cheating. Russell, trying to avoid the topic. End of chapter. Regardless of his inner, screaming groundhog, Russell ultimately accepted the harsh reality that he was about to read his diary to his daughter personally. After offering a few perfunctory words of comfort to Russell, Lynn conjured another bubble and handed it to him, explaining, take this. Tonight, keep it by your side. I will use it as a medium to guide you into a dream. Remember, don't resist. Once you're in the dream, if you have any thoughts of attacking me, restrain them. Don't wander around or try to explore, otherwise, I can't guarantee the consequences. Lynn spread his hands and added, after all, you know a bit about my true nature. My mental world isn't that safe. Lynn wasn't trying to scare Russell, he genuinely didn't fully understand the depths of his own soul. He feared accidentally triggering his true self and getting trapped. If Russell wandered or showed hostility in Lynn's mental world, the outcome could be unpredictable. Russell's hand froze, recalling the aftermath of his persona's corruption explosion. Suddenly, he was more concerned about safety than embarrassment. He looked at Lynn nervously and asked, "Wait, is this really safe? I don't care about myself, but Bernadette. Don't worry. Bernadette is only sequence 3. Even if she wants to explore, she won't get the chance." Lynn gave Russell a slow, mysterious look and said, "The higher the sequence in my mental world, the more dangerous it is because you'll see far more than others." "No problem. Low sequences can't pass the first level, and high sequences might come close to his true self." Seeing Russell's worried expression, Lynn added, "But it's not a big deal. As long as you stay calm and follow the dream's rules, everything will be fine. The dream I create is completely safe, but beyond that, I can't say." Lynn was confident in creating a safe dream within his mental world for others to meet. "Don't worry, I don't have a death wish. I won't wander," Russell promised. Then, looking at Lynn, he hesitated, "So, it's really okay." Lynn rolled his eyes and smiled, "If you're that worried, I can cancel this meeting." "No, let's do it." Russell quickly shook his head. He wasn't overly concerned. Deep down, he knew that despite Lynn's bad character and the numerous times he'd been humiliated, the Angel of Secrets wouldn't harm them without reason. Since Lynn assured him, Russell trusted it was safe enough. On this basis, Russell wanted to meet Bernadette. Despite his reluctance to read his diary to his daughter, he still longed to see her. It was a father's instinct. "Then I'll go prepare. You should think about how to win over your dear daughter." Lynn waved and ended the call. Russell sighed, holding the bubble and watching Lynn disappear. Alone again. Russell glanced around the empty tomb, devoid of any living thing, not even a plant. For someone used to constant activity, this solitude was lonely. He didn't mind Lynn's calls, even if the Angel of Secrets always teased him. For someone who had been in this tomb for over 150 years, any communication was better than none. After all, even though he spent most of those years in a daze, 150 years was a long time. A normal person would have gone mad without contact. "Wait, did I forget something?" Russell frowned, tugging at his small mustache, eyes widening in realization. "Damn it. Lynn, you fucker. I haven't made my list yet. You promised to bring me things." Yes, the original topic was the list of items Lynn would bring him. But the conversation had shifted to Bernadette, making Russell forget about the items. Now he remembered, but Lynn had already hung up. Achoo. Meanwhile, in the fourth epic, Lynn, who had just hung up with Russell and re-entered his second account, rubbed his nose, puzzled. "Did I forget something? What was it?" Lynn thought for a few seconds and suddenly remembered. Oh, right, the lamp Jinn. He had planned to find and study the lamp Jinn. Where was it? Probably with Bernadette. Allow me to introduce the 005 wishing lamp, which has never been obtained by the 7 major churches but has an 0 level sealed artifact number. The 005 wishing lamp existed in the first epic and is closely linked to the former Lord of Mysteries. The wishing lamp, seemingly just a full sequence 2 characteristic sealed artifact, actually contains an outer god. The outer god Lynn joked about is the lamp Jinn. Because of this outer god, the wishing lamp can grant 10 wishes, usually in a twisted form, often with unpredictable and terrifying consequences. Almost none of its past owners had a good ending, including Russell Gustav. Russell had figured out a way to use the wishing lamp, avoid the dangers of the first 2 wishes but never make a third wish. In the original story, Bernadette made 2 wishes with the 005 wishing lamp, before sacrificing it to the fool, leading to the famous scene where the lamp Jinn, repeatedly deceived by the former Lord of Mysteries, decided to invest in the new Lord of Mysteries. Though Lynn knew this outer god likely chose to support Klein partly to suppress the former Lord of Mysteries. End of chapter. Compared to reviving the former Lord of Mysteries, Klein now seems much better in all aspects. Although the lamp Jinn is an outer god and will eventually oppose Klein, it won't face a fate worse than death. At least, it won't suffer worse than falling into the hands of the former Lord of Mysteries. Of course, there's also the chance the lamp Jinn's vision is poor and it mistakenly takes Klein as a naive cat. Well, you never know. Among all the outer gods, only it got tricked into being sealed, indicating either its brain or eyes have some issues. Lynn pinched his chin, feeling his guess was quite reasonable. Now that he remembered the whereabouts of the 005 wishing lamp, Lynn wasn't in a hurry. He planned to borrow it after Russell and his daughter met in the evening. He could also ask Russell, the former owner, for some advice. Although Lynn wasn't particularly afraid of the lamp jinn, there were still many ordinary people around him. If any trouble arose, it wouldn't be good. Therefore, he needed to understand its characteristics in advance to prepare accordingly. If I could convince the lamp jinn to let me study it voluntarily, that would be even better, Lynn murmured to himself, suddenly hearing the voice of the Evernight goddess. Sorry to keep you waiting. It's all right, it wasn't very long, Lynn responded, smiling as he looked up at the Evernight goddess. His gaze also fell on the angel behind the goddess, who seemed a bit puzzled. Yes, the reason Lynn hurriedly transferred his main consciousness to the fourth epoch after persecuting Russell was to meet the Evernight goddess. Or more precisely, to meet the god of steam and machinery, who had been persuaded by the goddess, and to take the agreed-upon characteristic of the Illuminator. At this moment, seeing the future god of steam and machinery in person, Lynn couldn't help but examine the individual. The person in front of him was a youth dressed elegantly. The only reason Lynn thought of the individual as a youth was because he couldn't quite determine if they were male or female. Judging by the face, the angel of crafts could be a girl, though with some handsome features. However, looking further down, Lynn saw short silver hair typically sported by males and a flat chest that did not differ much from a boy's. The attire also leaned more towards masculine. If it were a normal person, as a master of disguise, Lynn could have judged correctly. But this individual had many modified parts, making it impossible to judge by normal human standards. So, he is a boy with girlish looks. Lynn blinked, staring at the person for a couple of seconds, still unable to tell. This is Yug Stiano, you can call him artisan or the angel of crafts, Amonizes, unaware of Lynn's internal struggle, first introduced him beside her, then introduced Lynn to the puzzled artisan. This is the mechanical angel, Libert Abraham. You should have heard of his name. Artisan's pupils shrank. Of course, he had heard of Libert Abraham, or rather, recently anyone above a certain level had heard of this name. This was mainly due to his status as the son of Mr. Dor and the recent creation of the Gathering of the Gods by him. But why was he here? And why was he the mechanical angel? At this moment, Artisan, who had no concept of steam and machinery yet and was only familiar with traditional Beyonder weapon modifications, showed a clear confusion. He looked at Lynn, thought for a moment, and then spoke. Hello, mechanical angel, nice to meet you. His voice was crisp, leaning towards feminine. Lynn smiled back and said, Hello, angel of crafts. I am also very pleased to meet you today. Libert, here's the agreed upon item. Seeing the two getting along, Amonizes suddenly interrupted, handing a sealed metal box to Lynn. Thank you very much, Amonizes. Lynn raised an eyebrow, took the metal box, and without much formality, as this was part of the deal. Wait, is that, the angel of crafts, watching from the side, seemed to sense something. This wasn't surprising. As an illuminator, it would be strange if he didn't react to the illuminator characteristic. The illuminator characteristic, part of my deal with Amonizes, Lynn answered without hiding it from Artisan, smiling as he opened the metal box. Inside was the illuminator characteristic, sealed as an artifact. This wasn't unusual. Most angel-level characteristics that weren't assimilated turned into sealed artifacts over time. Pure characteristic forms were rare. But this wasn't an issue for someone at the angel level, who could easily revert a sealed artifact back into its characteristic form. Lynn picked up the Illuminator sealed artifact, raising an eyebrow as he sensed a provocative aura from it. It's alive. This was a sealed artifact with sentience. That's fine, Lynn chuckled. A sentient sealed artifact could be troublesome for others, but not for him. In the next second, Lynn extended a bit of his spiritual power into the sealed artifact. The sealed artifact, which had been provoking him moments ago, began to tremble as if terrified. Lynn wasn't surprised. Through 008, he had discovered that high-sequence sentient artifacts were more sensitive and fearful of his aura or corruption than regular angels. He had thought about why this was the case and concluded that these artifacts had low intelligence, while his corruption, whether mild or not, was of an extremely high level, causing them to misjudge. Or it might be because these artifacts, sentience couldn't compare to human souls, making his mild corruption lethal to them. Regardless of the reason, this didn't prevent Lynn from using his trait to reason with sentient artifacts. After spending a few seconds convincing the Illuminator sealed artifact to work for him obediently, Lynn looked up at Artisan, who seemed completely dumbfounded. Indeed, his mind was a mess. He looked at Lynn and the Illuminator sealed artifact in his hand, then at Amonizes, who was just a step away, and asked in a defeated voice. If I voluntarily give up the Illuminator characteristic, will you let me go? End of chapter. If I voluntarily give up the Illuminator characteristic, will you let me go? Hearing this, Lynn raised an eyebrow and his smile became subtle. It was clear that Artisan had given in, and without hesitation. This wasn't surprising. Even in the original novel, Artisan wasn't someone like the Storm Lord who would fight head-on. As someone who had a fair share of luck, he was more inclined to go with the flow. Maybe not exactly cowardly, but definitely not the most courageous or decisive. Otherwise, how could Artisan have taken over 1,000 years to digest the potion even after becoming a paragon, only reaching the level of other Sequence Zero with Russell's help? Even in investing in others, Artisan was hesitant. While other gods like the Evernight Goddess and even the Storm Lord invested in Klein early, he only decided to choose a side during the final battle. Not too late, but if he had hesitated any longer, Klein wouldn't have needed him. Artisan was never particularly forceful, but he wasn't stupid either. Realizing that the Evernight Goddess might have changed her support and tricked him here to kill, it was normal for him to give in. But it felt like something was missing. Lynn thought it would be more satisfying to give Artisan a beating first. He regretted not having the chance. Though Lynn didn't have a deep-seated grudge against Artisan, he wasn't fond of the angel either. After all, he had betrayed Bonneva and backstabbed the Evernight Goddess. He was partly responsible for the war between Loan, Faceac, and Intis. While the blame could be shared, Lynn and Artisan were naturally opponents due to their sequence rivalry. Lynn also had to consider the future Artisan who would become a god. If he could show his strength by beating him up, it might be better. If they only relied on the intimidation of the Evernight Goddess and Mr. Door to make him work, it could cause unnecessary trouble. So, if he didn't want to give up the Illuminator characteristic, they would certainly have fought. But since he was so compliant, it wasn't appropriate to attack him. After all, Lynn wasn't a demon who would beat someone without reason. Artisan shivered, possibly sensing Lynn's unspoken malice. He instinctively took a step back and then looked at Lynn, saying, "Although I am willing to give up the Illuminator characteristic and withdraw from the competition for Paragon. If you really intend to kill me, I will fight to the death and severely injure you. Even a rabbit will bite when cornered." Although Artisan wasn't very aggressive, he had reached Sequence 1 and wasn't weak. He was willing to give up the characteristic to keep the peace, but if Lynn and the others pushed him too far, he wouldn't go down without a fight. A Sequence 1 might not be as strong as a Sequence 0, but if they fought desperately, even a non-adjacent Sequence 1 could cause a Sequence 0 some trouble. Adjacent pathways were a different story, like Klein with the Saphira Castle instantly killing Zeradul after ascending to Sequence 1. Don't be so tense. I do want your Illuminator characteristic, but I don't intend to push things too far. If you are willing to cooperate, that would be perfect, Lynn said in a soothing tone. He looked at Artisan and smiled, and even if you don't trust me, you should trust your old friend, Amonizes, right? Artisan had 1,000 complaints. He used to trust the Evernight Goddess, but now it was hard to continue. It wasn't his fault for thinking this way. From his perspective, it looked like a trap. Being invited to the Evernight Goddess's divine kingdom, meeting Mr. Door's child, and discovering a deal involving the Illuminator characteristic between Mr. Door's child and the Evernight Goddess. Combining all these factors, it was easy to conclude that the Evernight Goddess had a new support target and that he was the sacrificial lamb in this deal. In a sense, Artisan wasn't wrong. Should I trust her? Artisan glanced at Amonizes, who was standing calmly with a smile, and muttered. You can trust her. Although Amonizes made a deal with me and chose to support me to become Paragon, she didn't plan to harm you, Lynn said with a smile, calmly pouring himself a cup of tea and pushing another cup toward Artisan. I know you're tense right now, so how about sitting down and having a cup of tea? After hesitating for a moment, Artisan chose to sit opposite Lynn. Ammonizes followed and sat beside them. Artisan tried to ignore the Evernight goddess. Although he felt angry and sad that Ammonizes had changed support, he wasn't too surprised. Anger and sadness were minimal because this was the norm among high sequences and gods. Supporting someone today and betraying them tomorrow was normal. But this didn't stop Artisan from feeling very depressed. After all, it's never pleasant to lose what was already in your grasp. But what could he do? The situation was against him. He couldn't defeat the Evernight goddess, and even if he fought desperately, he would only cause minor trouble for her. End of chapter. Sigh. The Angel of Crafts couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Fortunately, he was the type to adapt to circumstances, and after feeling frustrated for a while, he accepted reality. So, he abruptly picked up the teacup and drank the tea in one gulp, then said, I can cut off the Illuminator characteristic for you now, but how can I be sure that once I give it to you, you'll let me go? Ammonizes, it seems your credibility with him has already collapsed. Lynn heard this from Artisan and didn't rush to answer. Instead, he glanced at the Evernight goddess beside him and teased. There is no such thing as credibility between gods. We ally because of interests and part ways when needed. Ammonizes also picked up the teacup, but only took a small sip. Her gaze then fell on the Angel of Crafts as she said, but as Ammonizes, I regret this. Shouldn't I be the one regretting? I'm the one being sold out. Artisan grumbled, clearly having a reasonably good relationship with the Evernight goddess, although that didn't stop them from backstabbing each other. If you want assurance, I don't mind signing a binding contract with you. Lynn took a sip of tea and said unhurriedly, but compared to a contract, I have a better idea. What idea? Artisan asked, instinctively sensing something was off. Perhaps you wouldn't mind working for me. Lynn looked at him, smiling. My goal is to become the demon of knowledge, which means in the future, I could split the Illuminator characteristic into two for my followers. If you work for me, these two Illuminator characteristics can be yours. Lynn was undoubtedly making an empty promise, and a big one at that. The last person he made such a promise to was Russell. Artisan was stunned for a moment upon hearing this. Then he seemed to think of something and hesitantly asked, can you tell me your current sequence? I am currently a Sequence 2 Knowledge Magister, Lynn said with a smile, without any intention of hiding it. So, a Sequence 2, where did you get the confidence to become a great old one? Is it because of Mr. Door and Ammonizes behind you? Artisan didn't speak, but he was already speechless in his heart. In the end, the reason he chose to surrender was because of Ammonizes and Mr. Door behind Libert Abraham, not out of any great respect for the son of Mr. Door himself. Although he was curious about how Libert could organize a gathering of the gods, that was all. Hearing Lynn's goal made him feel particularly speechless. Xness. No, they are not my support, never have been. Lynn could see what he was thinking, so he put down his teacup and showed a brilliant smile, saying, I understand your concerns. When looking for a job, you definitely want to find a powerful boss and a promising company. So, Artisan, I can give you a chance. Lynn looked at him, smiling, a chance to defeat me. If you can beat me, I won't take your Illuminator characteristic. If you lose, you'll work for me and become my follower. How about that? Hearing this, Artisan's eyebrow twitched fiercely. He wasn't stupid and could naturally see Libert's confidence, which made him more worried, suspecting that he might not be bluffing. After some thought, Artisan looked at Ammonizes beside him and asked, do you agree to watch over the battle? I would be very happy to witness this battle, Ammonizes said with a smile. She agreed very much, as no one in this world would want to find out Lynn's true strength more than she did. Making a deal with Lynn and supporting him in becoming a paragon was one thing, but probing his strength was another. For Ammonizes, there was never any contradiction in this. Upon hearing this, Artisan couldn't help but bite his lip. If he had been too preoccupied with the frustration of losing his characteristic earlier to notice, he now realized that the one leading this meeting from start to finish seemed to be this son of Mr. Door before him. And Ammonizes seemed very wary of him. So, what's the situation here? The Angel of Crafts was puzzled. He looked at Ammonizes and then at Lynn, finally saying, all right. He wanted to see what was so special about this son of Mr. Door. The battle between Lynn and Artisan ended quickly. No, strictly speaking, it couldn't even be called a battle. It was more of a one-sided crushing. From start to finish, he didn't even manage to touch Lynn's clothes, let alone hurt him, before being easily defeated. Are you really a sequence too? Back in the divine kingdom of Evernight, Artisan looked at the leisurely tea-drinking Lynn and felt that one of them must have misunderstood what sequence 2 meant. I am indeed a knowledge magister, Lynn replied unhurriedly, but I am not just a knowledge magister. An ancient god. The god of crafts cautiously guessed, thinking of something. Could Libert Abraham be an ancient god or a dormant great old one with very chaotic characteristics? But it didn't seem like it. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart. As an angel from the second epoch, he had followed ancient gods before and knew what they were like. And the young man before him didn't seem crazy at all. Lynn smiled, not explaining anything to him. He put down his teacup and looked at him, saying, rather than worrying about what I am, why don't we start over? Lynn smiled at him and said, Lynn Sotos, your future boss. Lynn, the angel of secrets. Artisan was taken aback, then finally remembered this name from the depths of his memory. You were the one who followed the ancient sun god. Clearly, he didn't sense any incongruity and didn't notice that this part of Lynn's history had been altered. Lynn didn't explain this either, merely smiling and nodding. You could indeed call me the angel of secrets. So, your identity is Mr. Door's son. Oh, I see, it's a fake identity. Artisan showed a look of realization and then looked at Lynn, saying, although I'm not sure what's going on with you, I suppose it's not my place to know. As your follower, what do I need to do? A bet is a bet, and Artisan naturally wouldn't choose to renege. Or rather, he didn't dare to. If he had some contempt for Lynn before the battle, he now fully understood that this young man before him was a powerhouse. The Angel of Crafts was inherently adaptable, and in this situation, he naturally didn't mind working for Lynn. End of chapter.